am a 100% container gardener. So what exactly does that mean? Well, it means I grow nothing, nada, not even my rose bushes, in ground. Everything I have in my entire garden, which I typically have well over 50 plants, is in a container. Not necessarily this small. They vary in size and diameter and shape, but they are containers. I don't garden in raised beds, and for those of you all who think raised beds are containers, they are not containers. Raised beds are simply raised. They're at waist length or knee length, but the bottoms, they don't have bottoms like this with holes in them. They just have something that surrounds the outer side, and your plants can grow straight down. I have a few things stored right now in here, but this right here is an example of a raised bed. You can see the diameter. It's taller than if it were growing in ground, but there is nothing in the bottom. This is also another raised bed. When you grow in a raised bed, the roots eventually will filter down and continue to grow in ground. And at some point, you could probably actually, depending on what you have in that raised bed, you can take the raised bed off and your plants will still be growing because their roots have finally reached the ground. With containers, it's different. The roots will stop at a certain point because they have nowhere to go but the end of the pot. And this is why, depending on what it is, we have to do sometimes what's called up potting. We have to put it in a larger pot, especially when it comes to fruit trees. So that's the main difference in a container garden as opposed to doing it in raised beds or in-ground gardening. Container gardening is perfect when you're limited on space. Maybe you don't have access to enough ground space to be able to grow in ground, or you don't have access to a yard at all. Or you might just simply need more control over what you're growing. If you're growing something in containers like mint, which is very invasive, you can contain it. It's not going to spread all over your entire bed or your entire garden. A lot of people integrate the concept of container gardening throughout their garden by placing containers here and there, maybe it's on your porch or your patio, and you still have plenty of other plants in either raised beds or just in ground. But above everything else, container garden allows you to move your garden if you move, or if you have a plant that's growing and it needs more sun, maybe I need to put it back there in that sunny spot or something like that. I can also be creative because you can use anything for a container pretty much, and you can paint it, you can decorate it, you can have hanging baskets and all kind of floral patterns, or you can do anything you want when you garden in containers. One of the most important things about growing in containers is drainage. Because when you grow in ground or even in raised beds, your roots can continue to grow and search. And as most of you all know, the deeper you go in ground, you hit water, you hit moisture if you keep going. But in a container, not so much so. It needs to drain well, because if it doesn't, your plants can lead to root rot. And that plants also need to breathe. Sometimes in our containers, we'll put small particles, maybe rocks or something like that, because that actually helps the drainage. Once the water drains out, if you do have particles like wood chips or maybe rocks or something like that in the bottom of your container, the extra space allows the water to drain. But then once the water all drains out, you have space for air to get in, and then that will allow your roots to breathe. Roots can drown, so it's crucial that if you are growing in containers that you make sure All your containers have holes in the bottom, every last single one. And sometimes they will come with saucers on the bottom of the containers. And if they have saucers on the bottom of the containers, you have to be careful. Some saucers will allow the water to seep into the saucer and then it will overflow on the edge of the saucers. My red pots do that, but I have some that are brown and I had to take my saucers off because it was not letting the water escape. It was literally prohibiting any drainage from happening. All of my pots like this brown one, I had to remove the saucer from them. But my red pots, like these, they still have the saucers on them. Now the water drains perfectly, I mean perfectly, out of my red containers. But the brown ones, not so much so. So I literally had to remove it. The water was staying just soaking wet. And I'm like, why is this pot not draining? Because I was so accustomed to all of my red pots, although they have saucers, draining. So you have to really pay attention to see if your soil is staying extra moist, then you have a drainage problem. And that can damage it. I had one pot that no matter what I tried to grow in that pot, it died. Now I know why. Next up is light. When you're starting a container garden, you have to pay attention to the light, your sunlight, before you decide where you want to place. If you have your garden set up like I do, which is pretty much all in one spot in my yard, I don't have a pot over here and a pot over there. I kind of have them contained in a specific area. You want to watch the sunlight. You want to see how many hours of sun is that space getting? And the sun will rotate over my garden, so I know what edges will get the longest amount of sun, and whatever plants I need that 8 hours of sun, that's where I will plant those at. Some that can take 6 hours or even 4 hours, I will put those plants in that spot. Also, too, using vertical things that you can grow in or hanging things can help you maximize the light that you do have. During the growing season, I like to grow on trellises like this. This helps me maximize the light, whereas you can see the bottom part of the pot is next to a larger pot. So depending on where that sun is going to hit, it may not get as much if I just had everything growing in that pot still down in the soil. But I have an opportunity to maximize the light it gets by actually growing things that will grow up it or guiding them up it so it can get maximum light. And even if you have leafy greens that need less sun and maybe tomatoes that need more sun, when you're growing in containers, you can decide, you can maximize your light and your space, and you can change it quickly if needed as opposed to growing in ground. When you are growing in containers, it's really crucial to meet the nutritional needs of each individual plant. What nutrients a plant needs can actually change throughout the season, even as they move from just root to foliage to actually budding. Their fertilizer needs, their nutrient needs can change constantly. So you have to be aware of that, because as you're growing in containers, you will lose more nutrients than you will lose in ground, because as you water and it drains out, it's draining out of your plant too. Make sure that you familiarize yourself with each plant that you are growing as you grow in containers. As an example, vegetables tend to be heavy feeders. So you may need to fertilize it or feed it whatever nutrient it needs more than maybe some fruit. And don't skip giving it extra nutrients if it needs it. Just don't ignore, say, oh, it's going to be fine. It's going to find nutrients. It's not in ground. It's not going to find anything. You are going to have to provide the nutrients that it needs. One of the biggest questions that I get all the time is, can I grow this? Can I grow that? Can I grow X? Can I grow Y? Can I grow Z in a container? Just about anything that you grow in ground or in a raised bed can also be grown in a container. Sometimes, depending on the size of your container, the nutrients, and exactly what that plant is, your yield may not be as high. So if you want a higher yield of something, then you may need 4 or 5 containers as opposed to just one little section, and you can plant one thing and get this big, bountiful yield. But as long as you can meet the required nutritional needs of a plant, you should be able to grow it in a container. Now, as with anything, there are many plants that will perform better in a container, and there are certain varieties that are specifically meant for a container than others, but that's really no different than from zone to zone. I'm in zone 8A. Someone in zone 10 can grow something that I can't grow. Someone in zone 4 can grow something I can't grow. So it's no different than that. We all have things that we can grow better in our zone and our conditions than something else. I always say, if there is something you like, let's just take radish. If you just love radish, I got to plant my radish no matter what, but you can't seem to get it to grow. The first thing you need to do is research what varieties, if you're in a colder climate, what variety will grow in a colder climate. And that's the one you want to get. You want to grow in the middle of zones. So for an example, I'm in 8A. So I like to make sure that whatever fruit trees or vegetables that I'm growing, they can grow well in zone 7 through 9. I'm in the middle. That means a little colder, and it also means a little warmer. So if it can grow well in zone 7 and it can grow well in zone 9, then if I can't get it to grow, that means I'm doing something wrong. Okay? Because I'm in the middle. So that means it should grow just as well. Also, pay attention to the size requirements of a plant. You don't want to have to keep uppotting. Sure, you don't want this ginormous pot when it's something very small, but as it grows, be mindful of the size of pot. Not all, but most things, you can start off with at least 5-gallon container. So it can be a 5-gallon bucket. Just make sure you have drainage holes in it. It can be a 5-gallon flower pot. Make sure it has drainage holes in it. Most everything, one item, like even the tomato plants will grow very well in a 5-gallon bucket, but just one. So don't overcrowd your containers. Don't put 3 and 4 tomato plants in one container if it's a small container. Now, if you have a large container, then you can do that. I have some containers. My red containers are 13.5 gallon. My brown containers are 25 gallon, and my extra large containers are 33 gallons. So I have a variety of sizes. I have a couple of raised beds. So as you see, I haven't used them because I actually didn't know they were raised beds when I got them. But that means I have to grow something in ground technically. So I don't know what I'm going to do with them, but I have no plans on using them anytime soon. And I have like 6 of them. I have 2 boxes that are not even open yet. So they're just taking up space, but I'll make that decision. I may decide to grow something in them since I have them eventually, but for now, I just love growing in my containers. So, cool weather season, broccoli, beets, carrots, cauliflower, kale, lettuce, spinach, onions, leeks, peas, parsnips, potatoes, radish, and turnips. All of that grows well. Now, those are cool season, but they all grow well in containers. Your warmer season vegetables that I have noticed grow very well: beans, broccoli rabe, celery, chard, and even collards, cucumbers, edamame, eggplant, and fennel, okra, peppers of all kinds, summer squash, tomato, mylar spinach. Mylar spinach. That's a specific variety of spinach that will grow in warmer temps, as well as New Zealand spinach. And of tomatoes, determinate tomatoes really do best. And of course, your herbs. And you know I love my herbs, but sometimes some herbs can be a little hard to grow in containers. But so far, what I have experienced that grows really well in containers: parsley, oregano, thyme, mint, mugwort, rosemary, sage, savory, tarragon, cilantro, and dill, fennel. Like I said, basil, and even stevia. From the cool to the warm to the herbs. That's not all that'll grow well in containers. I've grown corn, wonderful, large, huge corn in a container. So there are an amazing amount of things that will grow excellent in containers. You just have to be mindful of the size of containers, your drainage, your light, pretty much the same things as even if you're growing in ground or in raised beds. The beauty of it is, if it's not working where it is, you can move it. If you are new to the channel, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me today here in my garden. I really do appreciate each and every one of you guys. Take a second and subscribe to the channel. Let's get to 100,000 subscribers. Returning subscribers, thank you so much. And channel members, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Don't forget to check out my other channels, Cooking at Pam's Place, Pam's POV, and Pam's Pop-Ups. I'm Pam. This is Zone 8A. Anywhere you can sit a pot, you can grow a plant.